Greetings, curious souls, from Paranormal M. Get ready to explore stories that challenge conventional wisdom. Subscribe and enable notifications to keep up with our newest mind-expanding tales. Enjoy the ride. Dark being tried to push my cousin out of the house. I'm a 22-year-old female, and my 22-year-old female cousin is just a few months younger than me. During our teen years, we were extremely close. My parents were divorced, and I'd stay with my dad on the weekends. Every weekend, we would both hang out at his house, while my dad was out doing other things. I always had strange experiences in that house on my own. There was a lot of evil there. This particular weekend, though, the house wanted to push my cousin out. My cousin and I had been listening to a song together on my phone. It was The Cave by Mumford & Sons. I generally liked the song, but for whatever reason she was really freaked out by it and thought that the song had a creepy vibe. Later on, I ended up somehow losing my phone in the house. We checked everywhere, multiple times. I specifically remember checking the kitchen in depth, multiple times. But after a while of searching, my phone was magically placed perfectly in the middle of the kitchen counter, and it was playing The Cave by Mumford & Sons on a low, creepy volume. There's no way it was there before, and I remember being especially creeped out because I hadn't even been playing music on my phone when I lost it. The next day, my cousin woke up before me. They decided to take a shower. I woke up to the sound of water and her yelling, saying that she needed help. I went into the bathroom to help her, and I found out that one of our pipes had literally burst through the wall, and it was spraying water everywhere. We called my dad and let him know what was going on, and a neighbor lent us a shop vac and helped us turn off the water to the house. The house didn't have any problems with plumbing, and when I talked to my cousin, she told me that she didn't do anything that would have broken it. She literally just turned on the shower, and the pipe next to the toilet just burst and started spraying her super hard with water. After my dad was informed and the water was turned off, he still wasn't going to come back anytime soon. So my cousin and I decided to walk to the gas station to get some fresh air and some snacks and take just a break from that house. When we got back, we sat up in the living room eating our snacks and hanging out. The living room was near the kitchen, and all of a sudden we started hearing things loudly move inside of the kitchen. We both stopped talking and just stared at each other. Then it started moving again. The house didn't have mice, but either way, the movements were too loud, heavy, and intentional to have been from a mouse. At that point, we both shot up and ran to my room, locked the door, and started crying. She ended up calling her mom to come take her home. Here's some added info. My cousin would also get headaches constantly when she'd stay at his house with me. My dad was and is a very evil man. As the years have gone by, I've realized that he's most likely attached to some sort of evil spirit. He did unspeakable things to me as a child, and his house always felt so dark and heavy. The energy was so thick, you could physically just feel it. After a year or two ago, my best friend went with me to that house to collect some of my mail. She came inside to use the bathroom, and we could both feel and somehow even smell the evil in that house. She felt pressure on her chest, trying to force her out of the house. With me, it was dark, angry, and depressing energy. But I had the understanding that it wanted me for some reason. I think that the house tried to push away the people that have helped me in my life so that it could keep me there. My dad wasn't there when we went to go get mail, but after we left, My dad saw that I had been there. He kept trying to harass me to come back, and a whole slew of dark things started happening to me after that. Yet, I've now gained the strength to cut him off completely, and haven't been back to the house since. Tapping on the window, same time, same day of the week. Last week to the date, my fiance and I heard 3 loud tapping noises in our window, which is far too high for anyone to reach. We investigated and found nothing. However, the very next day, my fiance ended up being septic from kidney stones and had to have emergency surgery. Well, once again tonight, right at dusk, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I was asleep and I dreamed I'd heard knocks, but not as loud and more erratic. Upon awakening, I asked my fiance if he had heard any more tapping. He looks at me and says, "Yeah, but you were dead asleep. How did you know?" It's strange that it happened at the same time, at the same day, just a week later. However, as noted, it wasn't the same. It wasn't loud. It was soft and erratic. Last time, it was literally tap, tap, tap. It's probably imperative I mentioned that we used to live in a duplex, right beside the paths that we live in now. My kids got scared, and even my dad. These apartments and the duplex are part of a 3-apartment building property, with a duplex that was once a huge home. None of the buildings are connected, though. It was all built in 1890. It was a school for the Brethren. One building burned back then, but it was rebuilt. Just a few years ago, another building burned. We've had many ghost hunters want to investigate, but we've only allowed one team because it scared the kids. My grandparents used to live in the duplex as well and referred to them as Hanks, quote unquote. That's an old Appalachian term for ghosts. They did say that they had experiences that could not be explained, however. For instance, covers being pulled off, messing with their feet and seeing things out of the corners of their eyes. When we lived there, we experienced the same, as well as the feeling of someone climbing into the bed, and like something strong running at our bed. Seeing a woman on the roof in a thunderstorm and a man in a flannel jacket. I don't feel scared here, but I've been hearing some things, and now the tapping. Not in the best health, with liver disease and ruling out cancer. I was told the first 3 taps were a warning to my fiancé being sick by a possible guardian angel or loved one, but he's fine now. Nothing else happened in between the taps, but it is super strange. A, I heard it in my sleep, and B, same time of the week at the very same time. The only difference was the pace and the count. SN. After he got through surgery and I was laying in bed, I just sort of said thank you to the window. Any thoughts or ideas? The former tenants never left. So to start off, the beginning is retold from my best friend. We met in college, and I'd recently found out that she was moving to my home state. Her family had negative and positive spirits around her whole life, so experiences at her new house weren't a shock. Her former almost stepfather had a rocky past, and the spirits in the house made it very clear that they did not like the negative energy that he brought into it. They were constantly restless, even chasing said almost stepfather out of the house to sleep in the car, which is pretty bad, I guess. The cabinets were being thrown open, and that's what changed the tables. When I arrived there over the summer to visit her family, the man had completely vacated and was legally not allowed to come back, though those spirits, I would say, were unhappy. I was told that they like to walk around in a circuit around their upstairs at night. And boy, did I hear it. Very heavy footsteps, and an uneasy feeling accompanied the entire night. There was no time to relax. At one point, what we think was the former male tenant's spirit would shove her bedroom door open, which is no easy task as it is. My last night there during that stay was quiet. Since it was clear that her stepfather wasn't returning, they seemed to be happy. The family doesn't know much about the past owners of the house, but what they did know was that no one outside the family had ever lived there, meaning that my family's friends is the first to live there. So, my friend, let's call her Jessica for the story's sake, settled down to sleep for that night with her giant dog in between us. The dog had shoved me all the way to the end of the bed, and it woke me up when my arm fell off to the side. When I opened my eyes, I saw a woman standing in front of her dresser. She was wearing a white nightgown and had very long black hair, which seems stereotypical. Note, I'm not a lucid dreamer, so I knew I was really awake. I didn't have a bad feeling in my chest, like when I get something negative is going on. So I just turned over and went back to bed. I didn't say a word about it since I knew what to expect from the house. Another night goes by, and I slept through it. The next day, Jessica and I were sitting outside on her porch, just kind of relaxing. I look over at her and tell her about my experience with the woman. She looks me dead in the eye and tells me to describe her. So I did, of course. She tells me that she saw the same woman in between the nightstand in front of her bedroom door. I didn't say a word to her until later on when this happened, so there was no chance of it being a psychological thing. I might have left summer camp, but I don't think it ever left me. I'll preface this with I used to go to a summer camp for 7 years, up to 3 weeks throughout each summer, and I adore this place. It's truly the reason I'm the person I am today. Of course, we had our ghost stories that we told, most of them fake, but there is one real one. Man, I'm getting the chills just writing it. There was a girl who died at the camp back in the 70s. Let me say it again. She really did die there. I saw the records as last night's gift. She died of a heart issue during a soccer game. She had been complaining of headaches, and she was doing that all week. And then she suddenly collapsed and died in the basement of the main lodge. It's very tragic, but she always wore a yellow raincoat everywhere. That was her thing. And many a staff member have claimed to see her on the steps of her old cabin crying at night. I forgot about the story and told it simply as a campfire ghost story, in much better detail than this, I assure you. Anyways, years go by, and I head off to college. I made friends with some people. They were highly in tune with the paranormal world. I go to college in a completely different state, 7 hours away. But my one friend was able to distinctly describe to me how this little girl looks out of the blue, and how the camp looked overall. I had never told her this story prior to her description. My friend told me this girl had attached herself to me. My assumption is that I keep her memory alive, And I know her name, though I will never speak it. It's been over a year since that night, and ever since, I can see her sometimes at night. She'll either be standing in my bathroom, just observing, or standing somewhere else. And I never get an overly negative feeling, but it's not positive either. And I've gotten used to it. I moved into a new house this year, and I hadn't seen her in quite a while. But the other night, after some quiet, I woke up at 3:37 a.m. I looked over to a chair in my room, and I saw her sitting on the floor crying. I just looked, felt that sadness, went back to bed. I didn't want to give that attention. I've been thinking about it ever since. This happened last night. 3 knocks. This happened last night. My boyfriend and I were just sitting on the bed talking when we both heard noises coming from the front door. We just brushed it off, thinking, okay, whatever. Then 5 minutes later, and 3 more knocks on the bedroom door. At first, I thought it was my sister and yelled out to her and said, "Jess, is that you?" No answer. Then when I started to feel off and noticed what time it was about 3:15 a.m., which some refer to 3 a.m. as the devil's hour or the unholy hour. I messaged my sister and asked her if she replied. So she replied with a photo of her in bed saying, "I'm about to pass out, I'm so tired." It wasn't me, I swear, you're freaking me out. After that, I heard a dog howl and the knocks came again. 3, just like the first time. I felt very uneasy. Now, because of my beliefs, I instantly thought it's 3 a.m. and I have 3 knocks at my door. This is not okay. It's the devil's hour. What the fuck is going on? My boyfriend opened the door and there was no one there. My parents were snoring and everything. I tried to brush the feeling off and I just laid down, but I couldn't shake it. But I must have passed out because when I woke up, I instantly remembered the dream I had, and it was about death and a lot of it. I'm just gonna say it how I saw it. I saw people die on a black ship. First, so many. Then the scenery changed to me standing on a street next to a white fence that surrounded a house and watched some people on the street get murdered by this guy. No idea who it was. Then it changed again. There was a man just looked dark, and he was saying that he wanted me, and he was sitting down on a chair at a table outside. I was standing on the other side of that. He was saying to me that I'm coming for you. You're gonna be mine. I was so angry in the dream I was saying, you are not having me. You will never have me. It's never gonna happen. I'm too strong for you. He smirked. Then the scene changed again. I was standing in the backyard of my boyfriend's house, who was working with plants, and asked him what plants and herbs I need to use. He told me, but I couldn't hear him. It was silent, and then I woke up and felt very overwhelmed. I just kind of laid there trying to take it all in like, what the fuck? Once I had gotten up, I cleansed the house. Because honestly, I felt like something bad was still hanging around from the night before. And I think it worked. Still trying to figure out the dream, but fuck, it was intense. St. Thomas Church. One of many experiences. This one was about 8 years ago. Probably not that scary to other things I've experienced, but it was the first one that popped into my head. My first time posting here, so apologies if this is long. I went to a graveyard, and it had a church. and I went there with 4 of my friends. One of my friends knew about it, as he had come here once before. The rest of us had never been. Now, my intention was to go there to see if I could genuinely talk to any spirits, because of past experiences, you know. 2 of my friends, however, were the usual let's have a laugh and mock the dead, etc., while the other 2 were shitting themselves. As you do, I guess. We walked around for about 15 minutes and I was asking questions like, "Is anyone here that wants to talk?" But it was hard with my 2 friends acting like idiots, so I just thought, okay, this is kind of silly, and I'll just stop. Now, just to be clear, sorry, I should have mentioned above, the 2 cars that we took were right next to each other, about half a meter apart with big gates to the right of the cars, in which you would just enter straight to the graveyard through. We walked back to the cars. I leaned against one car, and my friend next to me on the left, and the other 3 leant on the other car. Leaned, I believe, yet again. Now we were all facing each other, just talking, when suddenly from the right of us we heard this voice, almost like a child's voice. "Help me." I'm not kidding, and my friends all looked right in the same direction at the same time. All of our heads just turned and we all went silent, giving each other that look like, what the fuck? I said quietly to them all, "You heard that right. Their faces said it all." Then about 30 seconds later, we heard it again. "Help me." But it was a bit fainter this time. My friends started to panic, and I was a little scared myself, but more curious. They opened their car door so quick it wasn't even funny. I don't blame them. I hopped in the back of my mate's car, the one that I was leaning on, and her car wouldn't start straight away. I looked out the window, and my 2 mates in the other car had already sped off. I was trying to calm my friends down, who was in the car with, but after about a minute, the car started. My friend drove off screaming. "I'm never coming back here ever," while my friend in the passenger seat agreed. When we were off the road that leads to the graveyard, she slowed down and I pulled my phone out to see if I could find anything about this graveyard, as I'd never been here before. I found out that there were 2 young twin brothers who used to play around there at the church and attend with their family, and that one day they were playing and tried to play a prank and something kind of went wrong. What wound up happening was they both caught fire and burned to death. Swear to God, that voice that we heard sounded exactly like a young boy's voice. Creeped me out. I told my friends, they agreed. They also said that they would never go back there ever. I honestly didn't blame them. Like, it's a graveyard. Me personally, I've been back 4 times. Something has happened every time. My doppelganger story. This happened more than 13 years ago in my old childhood home. This is just the first of 3 incidents that occurred when I was a kid in the late teens. This happened to my brother, so for context, my house was very much haunted and weird stuff happened all the time. I could go on, but that's for another time. Me and my brother shared one room, and our parents' room was right next to ours. There was a long hallway in front of our room that led to the kitchen. The hallway took a sharp right, and you'd end up in the kitchen. Even during daytime, this hallway was dark and dimly lit, but the kitchen had windows and was usually bright, during the daytime. On this particular day, me and my brother were just chilling in our room. I was on my bed reading a book, and my brother was on the PC. After a while, he left the room and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. He came back with a concerned look on his face. He asked me if I had been in the kitchen when he was there. I said no. I was just in the room reading my book. What he told me next still gives me chills. According to him, he opened the fridge to grab a snack, and when he looked up, he saw me standing at the kitchen doorway. He called out my name. I didn't respond and just stared at him with a blank expression on my face. He thought I was just trying to mess with him, so he chuckled to himself and told me to cut it out. But I still didn't respond, and now I had this weird grin on my face. So he just started walking up to me, and I started running from the hallway towards my room. When he walked out of the kitchen to catch up with me, I was gone. He thought it was weird, but just assumed that I ran into the room. He asked me repeatedly because he genuinely thought I was messing with him. I reassured him that I was not in the kitchen at that time. We were both freaked out and just felt weird the entire day. We decided never to talk about it again. I blocked this out of my memory, and reading the stuff here reminded me of this incident. So I thought I'd mention it to you guys. My Doppelganger Story 2. Thank you, Mr. Gecko. This is the second encounter I had with my doppelganger. This is the only time I saw this entity with my own eyes, and it still creeps me out to this day, 11 years later. This happened back in December of 2011, close to Christmas Day. I was on vacation with my family. We stayed in a small 2-story house in a gated community. A family friend of ours let us stay at this house since they had moved abroad years ago. The house had 3 rooms, 2 upstairs, 1 room downstairs, facing the kitchen. I stayed in one of the upstairs rooms with my mom and a 3-year-old sister and my older brother. I was 11 at that time, so I still remember this incident clear as day. Like I mentioned earlier, this was a gated community, so it was usually very quiet at night, and apart from the lights from the houses and the street lights, it got pretty dark too. For context, I've never been afraid of the dark. I've always believed in ghosts, though, spirits and stuff like that, since I was raised religious. And I always prayed before going to bed. I still do occasionally, mostly out of habit, but I'm not that religious anymore. But the idea of encountering a ghost never scared me. Due to my childhood home being haunted, my parents, my siblings, all of them encountered ghosts, but I'd never seen an apparition or anything of the sort up until this point. I did hear the occasional footsteps, doors being opened and closed, weird noises, the cliché stuff. This happened one night after the usual day of shopping and sightseeing. We came home pretty late and I went to bed around 11 p.m. I slept on a mattress next to the bed with my head next to the foot of the bed. There was a small cupboard directly in front of the mattress. Pointing this out for later as it's important for the context of this story. I got up around 3 a.m. to go to the bathroom. I'm a very light sleeper, so if I wake up during the middle of the night, I won't be half asleep or anything like that. I was wide awake when I went into the bathroom and got out. I picked up my blanket to lie down, and as I did, my eyes landed on where the cupboard was, and I just froze. Literal chills ran down my spine. There, sitting cross-legged, directly where the cupboard was this figure of a young boy, about my age and my size. I looked closely and observed him. I noticed that he wore the same pajamas that I was wearing, the same hair, the same shirt, same everything. Then I realized that I was literally staring at myself. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My body just completely froze up and I almost fell backwards. When my voice finally came out, I just screamed for my mom. She woke up and quickly turned the lights on. She had a puzzled look on her face, too, and asked me what was wrong. I couldn't speak, and I just pointed at the cupboard. And there it was. The cupboard was back where it was supposed to be, but no more apparition. Whatever I saw had completely vanished into thin air. I was able to go back to sleep that night, but it did take me some time. I slowly fell back asleep, and all the while staring at the cupboard. Whatever I saw that night, I still can't give a logical explanation for it. I'm glad that at least my family believes me. Since I've never been afraid of the dark, I wasn't really the type of kid that made weird shapes or got scared. For the longest time, I just brushed it off as my imagination, especially as I got older. Mainly because this was just too scary for me to remember, until my mom encountered the same entity years later. So now I know with absolute certainty that I didn't imagine this. It began with death. Going into my senior year, we lost a fellow student in a car accident. Pretty intense situation. I knew the girl named Taylor and had seen her in the hall only a few weeks before I said hi. We were never great friends, but we had few mutual ones and had spoken recently on chat about the guy we both knew named Eric, who was a few years older than us. After Taylor passed away so tragically, a lot of hurt was just seeping into our community. The mutual friend was devastated at the news. He became pretty important to the story, so remember him. So we met up with her family for the first time after her death. Taylor came to me in a dream that night. I was looking at her from across desks, and we never had a class together. I said, "Taylor, why are you here? You shouldn't be here." In my dream, my friend Jade turned around and said, "Who are you talking to?" Taylor disappeared before I could point out that she was clearly there. All of a sudden, this local graveyard beneath this tree on a hill with her. She just kept repeating in sobs, "I'm so scared, I'm so cold, I don't know why I'm here. Help me, I want my mom, I want to go home." All I could do was try to get the words just to comfort her or something, but nothing came of it, and I woke up. There was a service a few weeks later. The majority of our school attended. She was driven away in a hearse, and her family behind for a private burial in the local cemetery. I caught up with our friend Eric at the service, and he said that they picked up the most beautiful spot for her, on a hill, under a tree. I had no way of knowing that, and I had dreamt of Taylor a few weeks prior to it. To this day, it seemed so real when she came to me in my dream, that she was really crying out for help, one of the few people that may have been able to hear her. Something has begun following me. It replaced the first thing. I've been like this my whole life. I experience deja vu very often. I see shadow people, see and hear things others don't. I sense things. I see dreams of places I've never been and go through conversations with people who have already passed on. My whole family's like this from my mom's side, and I've been taught ever since I was young that it was simply a part of our heritage. Even with all that, these things can still be explained. I have a strong intuition, and I've always followed it. I moved with my family to a new house a few years ago. It's always been clear that there's a small house spirit, an elf as it's considered in our culture, and it's been with us for years. They're good-spirited and pretty treated well. They don't cause any harm. But that isn't what this is about. I noticed about a year ago that there was some sort of presence in the house, in my room. It tended to come out at night. It feels like it's about the size of a large cat, moves on all fours. I haven't ever really seen it, only felt its presence. I call it the Watcher. as it doesn't carry evil or even really a good sort of energy with it. Kinda just seems like it wants to watch and learn about us, but it doesn't want to make itself known. That much is pretty clear. It used to sit behind a pile of clothes in front of my closet, but now it's moved itself on top of a shelf in the high corner of my room, almost as if it can't come closer. The new thing became apparent a few months ago. I felt it outside in our family's yard, and something is seriously wrong with it. It's nothing like the Watcher. It feels slimy, it feels big and bony, and it makes me so uncomfortable. Even when I can't see it, I can feel it behind a corner or behind my back as I walk to the house alone at night. So many times I've had something say aloud, "You can't come in," or saying, "Go away." And I say this before stepping inside, just for good luck. It tries to get in as I open the door to get myself in. A few nights ago, though, it feels like it got inside. I had left my window open for a bit, as it was hot. I sleep extremely deeply and barely ever wake up in the middle of the night, but that night I did, in a cold sweat, and a horrific feeling that I was not safe. There was something in front of the closets, and the Watcher was small in its new place. I put my lamplight on, placed some sentimental items on my night desk next to my bed, after which I could go back to sleep again. The room felt so intimidating and dense, while at the same time the most calm and cool air was being poured in. Now it seems to watch me from the forest's edge, where our neighbors, my friend's parents' property, where their property starts. It's not really visible either. Not once have I seen it, but I already know how inhumane and uncontrolled it looks like. I've tried to do research on it, but I can't find anything that matches. Has anyone experienced anything similar to this? Can anyone please help me? Beginning to be afraid of going out at night, or going just to bed at night. I'm so goddamn lost. I'd even appreciate any ideas on what this thing following me is. I'm sorry, I don't got an answer for you on that one. But I'm slightly jealous of your elf on the shelf. I was possessed several times throughout my childhood. I grew up in an unbelievably haunted house. My mother, my brother, and I are all very sensitive to spirits. But that was hardly relevant when it came to this house. Everyone saw and heard things. I have endless stories of encounters that we had there, but in this post, I just want to focus on the hard evidence that I was possessed many times as a child. There was a period of time when I was around the ages of 7 to 9, where I would fall asleep in my bed, in my room, which was on the second floor of the house, and then wake up on the couch in the living room on the first floor of the house. The first time it happened, I thought my parents had moved me down there for some unknown reason, but they were just as confused as I was. You would think that sleepwalking might explain this occurrence away, but there's a problem with that theory. I was a small, hyper, and curious child, as most children are, and because of this, my parents installed French doors at the top of the stairs, and further installed a sliding bolt latch at the top of the doors to keep me from falling down the stairs at night. The latch was so high up that I'd have to retrieve a stool to climb onto the stool and then stand on my tippy toes to reach that door latch. Then, to finally open the doors, I'd have to move the stool out of the way. A small child sleepwalker could never do this, and even if I could, my parents had found that the doors were still closed each time they found me downstairs on the couch. Closing those French doors while on the other side with the steps would have been a challenge for me even if I had been awake. To this day, we have no explanation for how I kept ending up downstairs. What made it even more unsettling is that when this did occur, I'd often wake up on the living room couch with white goo all over me. The closest thing I could compare this to is like baby throw up. There'd be a trail of it leading to where I was on the couch. Many, many years later, after we had long left that house, I was going through some old drawings I made when I was a kid, around the same time I was having the sleepwalking issue. Sleepwalking in parentheses, mind you. I was very into video games, comics, and animation, and that's what I would usually draw. Within those drawings, I found some very disturbing drawings of an old building and what looks like portals. Many objects I couldn't recognize. They were very well drawn, and I've never been able to draw buildings well. They were better than anything I could draw even today, and I'm a decent artist now. There was only one word amongst the drawings, and it was at the top of the drawing of an old torn-apart building, and it looked like a portal next to it. The portal had something coming out of it that was beaming downwards. It was not my handwriting, or that of anyone I know. The title of that drawing simply said Monster. Haunted tenement built after World War II in Warsaw. Since my last post blew up, I thought that I can share with you some of my friends' stories, not from my apartment building, but they're interesting. So I had a friend that lived in an old tenement in Warsaw. If you ever heard about Polish history, especially I'm talking about World War II, you should know that Warsaw was practically one big debris. 700,000 inhabitants of Warsaw passed away during World War II. When the war ended and Warsaw was rebuilt, they didn't have any money for any of the materials. The city was completely destroyed and needed to be rebuilt as soon as possible. So what they often did is that they would be using old debris from destroyed buildings. But because they had to do it so fast, they didn't have time to separate human remains from debris. So they grinded bricks and human remains and used it as a component to make constructions. Back to the story. My friend lived in that type of tenement. The apartment had one bedroom, a living room, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a small hall. She shared with me 3 stories. First one. My friend shared a bedroom with her brother, and they had bunk beds, a pretty old, heavy closet, which one of its doors was blocked with a pretty heavy desk. One night when she was sleeping alone, she woke up around 1 or 2 a.m. and heard a weird noise, as if someone was moving this heavy desk around the room. She was a teenager at the time, and this sound scared the shit out of her, so she decided to cover her just with her duvet and try not to make any noise. She was shivering and the sound won't stop. Eventually, she fell asleep, and when she woke up in the morning, she saw that the desk was moved to the center of her room, and the doors to her closet were wide open. That night, she slept alone in her apartment. Here's the second story. One night when everyone was home, she lived with her brother and her mom. Her mom, who was sleeping in the living room, woke up in the middle of the night because she heard as if one of them was calling her. She opened her eyes, took a look around the room, and everything seemed fine. So she rolled back, and then she heard as if someone was whispering to her ear, "Mom, Mom, please help me, Mom, please." So she jumped out of bed and ran straight to the bedroom. When she opened the door, both of them were heavily asleep. Her mom told her this story many years later. Story 3. When my friend was completely grown up and moved from her house, her brother developed a bedroom for himself and chose to sleep at the bottom of the bunk bed. At the top, he stored books and other heavy stuff. Everything was fine, till one day. Her brother was home alone and chilling at the bed when suddenly he heard a doorbell ring, so he got up and went to answer the door. He peeked through the peephole, but there was no one standing at the corridor and the light was off. As he was standing in the hall, about to head back to his room, he heard a loud sound coming from the bedroom. When he came back to the top of the bunk, it was collapsed into the bottom, and the bell ring wouldn't have rung. He wouldn't have been alive. Ask Reddit, Marshville, North Carolina, 2008. My then girlfriend lived in a very secluded and rural area, and I lived about 45 minutes away from her. I drove county roads as much as I could to avoid highways, less traffic lights and stops. And this was a daily drive for almost 2 years. I always took the same road and I knew every inch of it by heart. It was mostly a straight stretch of road, except one area where it banked right up a hill. And as soon as it crested, it banked back downhill and left. Very few houses along the way and a fair amount of trees, so it was quite dark. Never once had I encountered anything out of the ordinary. There was rarely even other vehicles traveling. The most signs of life I ever saw was an occasional deer in the distance. However, one late summer evening I was headed home around 2 a.m., cruising around 40 miles an hour down the same road. Got up to the hill, made the first bank at the top, and as I turned into the down bank, I saw it, a humanoid shape cloaked in shadows. No discerning features, and oddly, my headlights barely illuminated it. This thing was just floating there, resembling how ink spreads through water. This was all I could make out before I realized that I wouldn't be able to stop in time to avoid it. I white-knuckled and squinted my eyes as I had no idea what I was about to mow down. At that moment, my bumper would have collided with solid matter. The black mass dissipated away. Yet I felt an ice-cold rush through the center of my car. My dash lights failed, but the throttle jerked in a sudden burst of acceleration. I didn't bother even glancing in the rearview mirror. I was frozen in disbelief of what I had just encountered. The dash lights flickered back on, and I took the first available turn. Sped away toward the brights of the highway. I went to a gas station, went in the parking lot, pulled up under the pump overhang there, basking in the warm fluorescent glow and trying to slow down my heart rate. I immediately called my girlfriend to tell her what had happened, but didn't get an answer. I was relieved at first, thinking maybe my imagination had just pulled one over on me, and I didn't see anything at all. Saved me from sounding like a raving lunatic to her, so I went to the gas station and bought some smokes, convincing myself that the dark really does play tricks. I wrote it off as maybe something wrong with the car, maybe it was aged or flawed. But as I made my way back outside, my fears began to rekindle. From a distance, I noticed something on the front bumper, and as I got closer, I realized it was on the hood as well. It looked like frost, a white strip of white frost across the center of the hood, grille, and bumper. Mind you, it was 78 Fahrenheit outside, which is pretty warm. There's no way it could be frost. Against my better judgment, I reached out to touch it. It was definitely cold, but more odd is that it was slimy. It melted into a goo-like substance as I felt it and stuck to my fingertips as I pulled my hand away. I just stood there for a few minutes and watched as it melted, congealed, and slowly dripped down and off the car. I have no idea what any of it was, and for a long time I told myself that it didn't even happen. Kept it to myself and made up weird excuses to my girl and friends why I wouldn't drive that road anymore after midnight. A few years went by until one night I was drinking with a close friend and decided to spill the whole story. He explained to me that him and his family had lived in the area for years, and while what I experienced anyway, was shocking, it didn't surprise him in the least. He told me his parents and grandparents had shared similar stories, and they always just said, "Old Scratch was out tonight." Ask Reddit. I've been wanting to share this story for Reddit for a long time, and I'm just getting the chance to sit down and put this experience into words. I'm unsure if anyone will see this while I'm reading it, but if you do and have any possible idea or theory as to what I saw, please let me know. You heard him. I also want to add that I'm not the best writer. No worries. But I'm going to try my best to paint a clear picture of what it is that I saw. This experience is 100% true, and it's the most frightening event to ever happen to me. Mostly because I've yet to think of a realistic explanation. I live in upstate New York, and my family owns 10 acres of land surrounded by field and woods. I've always had experiences growing up in this house. Maybe more stories to come, but anyway. It was late at night, close to 1 to 2 a.m. when this occurred. I have a window at the end of my bed that has an AC in it. It's about 8 feet from my window in the grass below. My cat, his name is Hudson, loves to jump up and out the windows and lay across and press up against the screen. This night, he had decided to jump up on that open window. I had totally forgot the screen to my window was out due to the AC. I didn't realize this until I heard Hudson hissing and screeching at something outside the window. I assumed it was some sort of animal, maybe a raccoon, tried to call him in. Suddenly, he had fallen out the window and started screeching. I have never heard him make a sound like this before and jump up out of bed, and I went outside to go get him. I went to my little brother's room to have him help me go find my cat. I was really nervous because he's gotten out before, and he's been missing for days on end before, so my fear of the dark was thrown out the window in this moment. I had my flashlight on and sprinted out the door and went to the side of the house where my window was. I made the turn and shined my flashlight on the area. What I saw was not my cat, but a 7 to 8 foot long figure trying to scale the walls of my house and reach into my open window. One of the creature's back legs were pressed against the house, while the front legs had a hold on my windowsill. The creature noticed my flashlight and looked in my direction. It had deep red eyes that kept me frozen in my spot. The creature stared me straight in the eyes and proceeded to let go of the house and move toward the field on the side. But it didn't go on all fours. Whatever this thing was stood on its back leg and ran quickly into the field. In the darkness, I was able to make out what looked like a set of horns or antlers on this thing's head. Its height on its back legs was at least 7 or 8 feet tall and didn't look at all like a human. Its posture was slightly hunched over and its arms swayed to the side of it as it moved. They hung close to the level of what I guess would be its knees. My little brother was in the front of the house looking for my cat, so I went out to go grab him and help me look in the field the creature was running into. At this point, I think my adrenaline was going so fast I didn't completely process what I had seen. We got close to the field and saw absolutely nothing. No cat, no creature. We made our way back to the front to look for my cat on the other side of the house. And without saying anything, my brother and I froze. We both looked toward the trees and the bushes at the side of the house and saw them rustling. We heard this painfully loud shrieking. We booked it to the front door. I have no idea if what we heard was that creature or some other animal, but I had an awful gut feeling standing in that driveway. It wasn't safe and I couldn't have my brother out there. I locked the door quickly and went to the back porch sliding door and saw my cat waiting at the door to be let in. He's the type to try to escape and be out for days with no issue. He's never once just come to the back door after getting out, though. He looked scared. His tail was the bushiest I'd ever even seen it. The poor thing was shaking. He ran inside and stayed away from the windows and doors the rest of that night. I've only told the story this much detail to my boyfriend, and even then, it's so difficult to explain what I had seen, what I had heard, and what I felt that night. The gut feeling that something is not right and we could be in serious danger was nothing I felt before until that night. The most memorable part of that experience was the feeling I got when the creature stared into my soul with those ugly, deep red eyes. I have nightmares about this event, and I see its eyes often when I close mine. It took me so long to process and analyze what I had seen, but the closest I can describe this creature and its stature is if you search up a Wendigo. Not completely sure if that's what this was, but I live fairly close to a so-called Wendigo territory in New York. The whole experience freaks me out thinking about it, so I thought I'd finally share. What happened to me? I've always had some sense of paranormal around me. Unexplained things have happened here and there, but they were easily explained away. Recently, within the last week, I've started to do some research on demonology. I'm not sure if this is relevant information to the story I'm about to share, but it might be. Last night was the meteor shower that everybody was talking about. My boyfriend and I live in Texas, and the city that we were in didn't allow us to see the stars very well. So we decided to go to a smaller town about 40 minutes away from where we live. We've been to this town a handful of times before. We've been on this particular road a handful of times before, and we've driven past this lake a handful of times before. This town has a secluded back road that has many farmhouses and a huge lake. It's super dark and the sky is incredibly clear. That's why we chose this spot to watch the meteor shower from. We pull over and park about a mile past the lake. So the lake is a mile behind us. We're parked on the side of the road, and my boyfriend turns off his car so that it can be pitch black outside. His car had been off for a few minutes when we started to hear noises of water. It sounded like how water sounds when you're just walking through it. Essentially just moving water. The sound was loud and came out of nowhere. I look up in front of the car and I see a man's face. There isn't a body, just a face. Now, this isn't too unusual for me. I've seen faces like this before, but it's never been accompanied by any sounds. I only see the face for a brief second before it's gone. I get this awful feeling in the pit of my stomach and my back. I told my boyfriend that we needed to leave immediately. It felt like if we didn't, something bad was going to happen. As soon as we left the area, I felt better almost instantly. I'm not sure why I did the next part, but I looked up on the news for the area that we were in. A man drowned in the lake 5 days ago. Naturally, I get creeped out. I've always had suspicions of the paranormal being around me, but never like this. Like I previously mentioned, I've also started researching demonology. So I'm not sure if that has something to do with this being such an intense experience. Any advice or insight would be helpful. I'm just trying to make sense of all these and understand what my next step should be. Should I dive further into the paranormal world, or would it be best to ignore it and move on? Not sure if paranormal or dream. 2 months ago, a friend committed suicide. It was very sudden. He didn't talk to anybody or leave a note or anything. Took everybody by surprise. Our friend group has been dealing with the aftermath of this ever since. And they were predictably a lot of emotions from everybody. We've just been getting through it the best we can. About 2 weeks ago, I had a dream. In this dream, I was sitting at a table across from my friend. There was a lamp on the table, so we had it light, but the area around the table was completely pitch black dark. He asked me how his fiancée and his son were doing. I told him that they were doing well, considering. He told me that he was sorry and that he knew that he'd made the wrong choice, but it felt like the only one in that moment. He asked if we forgave him. I told him we did. I asked him if he could still see us interact with us, and he said no, because the rules are different where he is. I asked where he was. He said that he's not in a bad place. But that's really all he could tell me about it, because again, the rules. I said, okay. We just kind of sat there for a while not saying anything, and then he said, well, it's almost time. I asked what he meant, and he just smiled all goofy at me and then turned the lamp off, and I woke up. I have a theory that the last part was him messing with me, because the night that he died, I said out loud, "You'd better be waiting for me when I go," and it would very much be in character for him to mess with me a bit. Again, I don't know if this was a visitation or a dream, but several other people in our circle have had similar dreams since his death. Strange creature encounter when I was a kid. This is a repost from my old account, but from another sub. I still live in the same house this occurred at. I'm now 26. I still have occasional nightmares about this encounter, as well as other strange and quite frankly terrifying nightmares in general, as well as bouts of sleep paralysis. I've had those all my life, though. I gave up my room around 2 years ago so my nieces could have their own separate rooms, and I began sleeping on the couch in the living room, right in front of the sliding glass door I speak about in this post, and due to the beginning of having night terrors, sleepwalking episodes where I end up outside, and loss of sleep due to the feeling of being watched from outside the house and inside, which both dogs and all 5 cats have had done things to make me think that there's something in my house. As of 4 months ago, I started to sleep on the floor in my mother's room. I told everyone it was due to her health and me wanting to keep an eye on her. And the puppy that I got was just keeping her up at night. And it's partly true, but ever since I made this transition, the nightmares are less and I haven't had the feeling of being watched. Except for one time, when I first started sleeping in here, but it went away and hasn't come back. This is also not my only paranormal encounter at this house. Or ever, and if anyone's interested in any of my other experiences, let me know or PM me. I'm glad to share. Thanks so much love to everybody in advance. Ya boy Nuke. Hello all, this is something I encountered when I was about 9 years old in late 2005, early 2006, so my memory's a little fuzzy on it. We moved into this modular home. Think a trailer, but on an actual brick foundation. It was in the rural area of Virginia in the summer of 2004. It was me, my mom, my dad, my older sister, her husband, and their child and my niece. I stayed home alone a lot after school and on weekends due to everybody having work and my niece going to the babysitter's house. It was never that big of a deal because my grandma lived right across the driveway. And we lived down a long gravel driveway that was off the main road. I can't remember exactly when this occurred, but it was after my dad died in April of 2005. I was home alone after school one day watching The Weekenders on Toon Disney with my little Pekingese poodle mix Clyde in my lap while eating some pizza rolls. Sounds good. All of a sudden, our huge, and when I say huge, this dog had no business being as big as he was considering what breed he was mixed with, a golden lab and boxer mix, Rudy, that we had chained in the backyard, started to bark. Not as usual, "Hey, I'm out of food and water," or "Squirrel!" bark. But it was violent and a scary bark. I looked out the sliding glass door that goes to the backyard and saw him at the end of his chain trying to break loose and get at something in the woods. I can't really see what he's trying to get at until all of a sudden some creature walks out of the woods and stops right at the tree line. It was about 4 feet tall, walked on all fours. Its body was similar to a bear, had brown fur in its face. I would say its most distinct feature. It was solid white and completely flat. It had 2 black slits where its eyes would be, no kind of nose to be seen, and its mouth just hung open, a black void with no tongue or teeth that I could see from where I was. It looked in my direction, and I remember just being overcome with fear and dread when it looked over at me. I started to shake. I was so scared, and before I could even get off the couch to get to the landline to call my mom, it slowly backed into the woods. Rudy was barking and growling the entire time that it was standing there, which, for your reference, was about 2 minutes total. And for at least 10 minutes after it left my sight, before it would finally calm down from all this, I called my mom, my sister, my brother-in-law, my aunt, my uncle that lived behind my grandma, and then my grandma before somebody answered. She told me to walk over, but I was too scared to go outside, so she came and got me. As a kid, I called it the white-faced anteater, and my family just dismissed me as seeing things, even though my dog had seen it too and was trying to get to it. My uncle told me that it was probably a big-ass possum. They always think it's a possum. But I knew damn well what a possum looked like, and that wasn't it. To this day, and I'm 23 now, I still have nightmares where all I see is this thing standing in my yard at the tree line staring at me. I always wake up screaming and sweating. My girlfriend has to console me. Has anyone ever seen something similar to what I described? I'd be interested to hear all y'all's encounters and stories. I, for one, as the narrator, very much recognize this story. So if I put the wrong story in here and doubled up, my apologies, everyone, but that's it for me for tonight. Hope you guys had a good time listening, and as usual, see you later.